Hi, I'm Sapali. Welcome to the English Academic Facilitator. In my previous video, I discussed how to analyze the opening and closing of a literary text. Today, I'm going to talk about the rest of the whole text analysis. That is, narrative perspective the writers use, and then how the focus shifts from paragraph to paragraph. So let's get started. First, let's take narrative perspective. There are three types of perspective in literary texts: first person, second person, and third person narrative. When it comes to first person narrative, we have three types: first person protagonist, first person narrator, and unreliable narrator. First person narrative is a mode of storytelling or peripheral narrator in which a storyteller recounts events from their own point of view. It's so easier to identify this narrative from the pronouns used in the text. If the first person pronouns are used, such as I, myself, me, and my, or we, ourselves, our, and us, it is first person. This narrative allows the reader to see the narrator's mind's eye of the fictional world. In first person protagonist, the narrator is telling his or her own story, being the title character. This is limited to the narrator's own experience and the awareness of the true state of affairs. There are a number of examples for first person protagonist in Edexcel Anthology. Now let's take one of them. In Edges for Hawk, Helen MacDonald is the first person protagonist who is relating her own story. The scene happens to be a pet store where Helen is choosing the very bird she is dreaming of. That is a hawk. So here the pronouns we and us refer to Helen and the shopkeeper, whereas he refers to the shopkeeper and the pronoun she refers to the hawk which her attraction goes to. If we take another example, young and dyslexic, Benjamin Seponia recollects his childhood memories as a dyslexic. He uses I, my, and we to narrate his own story. So he is the first person protagonist here. Now let's look at the first person narrator. This narrator relates dialogue with other characters or refer to information they heard from the other characters in order to deliver a large point of view. Joe Simpson's Touching the Void is an example for this type. This is taken from your old syllabus anyways. Here, the author employs two narrators to give their own accounts as their first-hand experience in mountain climbing to Andes. The first part of the text is Joe's account that gives the reader what he felt and what he did. The latter account is Simon's account. This narration is used for dramatic irony. That is, reader knows what will happen to Simon while he himself is unaware of the impending disaster. Now let's take an example from out of your anthology, that is White Sargasso Sea by John Rees. This is Antonette's point of view. And if the razor grass cut my legs and arms, I would think is better than people. Black ants or red ones, tall nests swarming with white ants, rain that soaked me to the skin. Once I saw a snake, oh, better than people. So this is the voice of Antoinette in Jane Eyre. But this is White Sargasso Sea. White Sargasso Sea is the other side of Jane Eyre. As the Antoinette or Mr. Rochester's mad wife's character is portrayed as a vulgar woman due to racial prejudice by Charlotte Bronte, John Rees, being a Creole woman just like Antoinette, wanted to expose the true nature of Antoinette and to unravel why this woman went crazy. So she employs here Antoinette or Bertha, or what we call the mad woman in the attic in Jane Eyre, to relate her own story, to give some justice to her hidden true character. So this is yet another example for first person narrator. Here, author is not the narrator. Let's take the last one I mentioned, that is unreliable narrator. Unreliable narrator is an untrustworthy storyteller. In Gillian Flynn's Gone Girl, the author employs the two main characters to give their own point of view about each other. That is Amy and her spouse Nix. Flynn doubles down on the novel's conflict here and dismantles the story's moral compass. Because Gone Girl analyzes conflict within marriage, even if both of them give kind of sugarcoating accounts about their spouses, as seen here, both wear emotional masks and both lie to the reader. This reflects on the writer, and the reader tends to question the writer for his credibility. So here, the narrator becomes unreliable. Now let's move on to the second person narrative. This narrative often finds in instructional writing, especially in brochures, leaflets, and catalogs. This text is taken from your old syllabus, and this is from your Road to Beach Safety. This instruction is for all boarders. Here, the imperatives like stay calm, float and raise your arm, swim parallel. So those imperatives represent do's. Do's means what you should do. And the last one is don't try to swim. So it's a don't. Don't means what you shouldn't do. So in second person narrative, the reader is addressed directly. The reader is transformed into a character as well. So that is the speciality in second person narrative. So the objective of second person narrative is to draw the reader closer to the story. The last one I mentioned is third person narrative. Here the author relates another one's experience. We can identify this narrative by the use of third person pronouns like he, himself, his, or she, herself, her, or they, themselves, their, or any personal pronoun. This is the most common narrative style used in fiction. If we take necklace, Guy de Maupassant relays Mathilde's experience. Necklace is about a woman who places no value on her humble existence, her husband, her station in life, instead only finds contentment in dreams of superficial luxuries. Mathilde Loisel's overwhelming desire to live a life of luxury blinds her to the comforts that she already possesses and ultimately leads to her losing what wealth and status she initially has. So this is an example for third person narrative that is easily recognizable by the third person pronouns. Well, now let's take another example from your syllabus, that is significant cigarettes. Here Rose Tremaine narrates Liv's experience while traveling to another country. Third person pronouns such as he, his, and Liv, the personal pronoun Liv, imply its third person narration. Now we have come to the end of how to identify the perspective of the authors in literary texts. Now let's move on to the elements to identify the changing of the focus. I'll discuss 5 elements here: sequence, shifts, patterns, coherence, and time references. Now let's talk about sequence first. Many fictions are written under 5 structural pillars. They are exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, and denouement or resolution. These sequences are also called Freytag's pyramid or 5 progressions of a story. Now let's take an example from your anthology to understand how these progressions work out in a story. This is Story of an Hour by Kate Chaffin. It's a short story. The theme of this story is freedom of women in 1800 Victorian society in America. The author Chaffin is contemporary short story writer at the same period. So she really wanted to criticize her society where women's roles were narrowly defined in households as wives. In this particular story, she portrays Mrs. Mallard as one of the many victims in her society, and her feelings and thoughts are brought out by her monstrous joy that overwhelms her realization that her husband's death would render her free to live as she chooses. This highlights the repressive nature of Victorian marriages. All right. Moving on to the 5 progressions, let's see how exposition stage contributes to the plot development of the story. This usually concludes monologues, dialogues, and protagonist's thoughts or a narrator's explanation of past events. Here, in this story, the problem, setting, and all the characters involved are introduced in the exposition stage. The situation is exposed by Mr. Millard's sister with her husband's sudden death of a rail accident. The structural device foreshadowing, one of the devices we discussed in our early video. Foreshadowing of Mrs. Millard's heart trouble is mentioned here to acknowledge the reader about the cause for her death at the end. Then the plot development takes place, that is rising action. Lot of conflicted thoughts are racing in Millard's head. How her perspective of her husband's death quickly changes to a cruel happiness, how she dreams of her future life as a widow, and how she anticipates for that freedom and all. Her thoughts are intensified by beautiful imagery where she sees through her window. So here, open window symbolizes her freedom she is longing for, and new spring life with the delicious breath of rain symbolizes her delightful future life she is anticipating in her thoughts. An auditory imagery like notes of a song twittering of sparrows enhances her monstrous joy at the news of the death of her husband. Here, the patches of blue sky symbolizes her unlimited freedom. A chain of thoughts are racing in her mind in this rising action stage. Here, the blue sky is contrasted with clouds piled in the west. This symbolizes her 2 worlds, her fantasizing future world and the repressive present world. And she humbly wishes to die away her cloudy old self or old life very soon. While looking out of the window, she feels all the sounds, scents, colors filled with air reaching towards her with a brand new life. As the word free escapes her slightly parted lips. Here she is whispering the word free as she moves away with her plethora of thoughts. At the same time, she switches to her dull life with her husband, and it's symbolized with the words fixed, grey, and dead. By now, she is fantasizing in the new world, forgetting everything about the news of her husband's death. Her monstrous joy overpowers and dismisses the suggestion of thinking about it, making the incident trivial. She feels she closes the door of her restrained marriage life and opens a new door to a fresh, independent, brand new life. And in this section of the rising action, she's thinking how long the period of bitter moment was, and she's pondering about how independent she's gonna be, leaving all the restraints of patriarchal dynamic. Anyways, she might not know that it's a brief moment of illumination, no matter how cruel her intention is. Now we've come to the highest level of interest in the story. We achieve the emotional response in this stage, that is, the climax. The climax reached with Mr. Bentley Mallard's sudden presence gives the reader goosebumps. Well, this cataphoric reference of revealing the identity of Mrs. Mallard's husband brings excitement and her torrent and outpouring emotions. The reader too gets surprised to hear the dead man's resurrection. After the climax is the falling action. The tension stems from the central conflict decreases and slowly moves towards conclusion. Here, Mrs. Mallard's conflicted thoughts, that's her divided thoughts between her symbolic, cloudy, repressive present life and her fantasizing world of freedom, decreases to a complete halt. Finally, we have come to the resolution or denouement. Mrs. Mallard dies, and the death is diagnosed as a sudden death caused by the extreme joy. But isn't it ironical? Certainly, yes, because the doctors too at that time are men who had no clue about the repressive state of mind of a woman who is experiencing throughout her marriage life in late 1800 American patriarchal society. However, the reader together with the writer already know the cause for her death. Guess what? It's the sudden shock caused by disappointment for not having her freedom she's been fantasizing few minutes before her death. Okay, so I'm gonna stop at this place and I'll see you soon. Thanks for watching.